What we're going to experience now is the speech of a very courageous woman with the name of Sevda Karaca. She's from Turkey. She's a journalist. She's a member of the management board of the Labour Party, and she's a member of parliament in Turkey for this party. What did you say? I can't understand you, sorry. It's astonishing that she found time to come here, because she is active in so many organizations. She's editor for the women's magazine Bread and Roses. And she has established a solidarity network for women. She is also the co-founder of a TV station, Hayat is the name. She's the author of various publications on Marxism and the liberation of women. And in an interview, I read something very nice about her. Let me read it out. She writes herself, "Our hope is with the workers who turn against this poor order, this disastrous order, the parents who defend themselves against this disastrous education, Kurds who fight against assimilation and lies, women who don't allow their rights to be taken from them." Of course, there is hope, and this is hope that raises its voice every day across the entire country, but I suggest that we better listen to herself. The title of her speech is to answer the question around the system. Socialism as an alternative.
Bu muhteşem salona Türkiye'den yoldaşça selamlar getirdim. Merhaba arkadaşlar, merhaba hepinize.
Hello. Welcome to all of you.
Burada yeryüzünün her noktasında devrimcilere ama özellikle de mücadeleci kadınlara feyz veren
Today we return from all areas of the world here, and we are here and gathered here in the name of Rosa Luxemburg, a revolutionary, a fighting woman who was an inspiration for the whole world. Let me briefly introduce myself and tell you something about who I am. I am Sevda Karaca. I'm a member of the General Executive Board of the Labour Party in Turkey, which for many years has had an important place in the revolutionary tradition in Turkey. And the party tries to change the struggle of the working class and contribute to this struggle from a Marxist point of view. I'm one of the socialist member of parliament, which is, I believe, one of the darkest, if not the darkest, parliament in the Turkish history, because we have the one-man government under Erdoğan. And because this one-man power works there with its most reactionary alliances. The slogan of the conference is, "Whose world is this?" And the conference focuses on the question posed by Rosa Luxemburg: socialism or barbarism? That is, in a world where the open barbarism of capital is gaining strength, where does the international struggle of the working class stand in order to create possibilities for a socialist revolution? That's a very difficult question, because in these times of barbarism, we see lies which have become the standard instead of the truth. We see frustration instead of the will to be a changing force. We see reactionary values and forces instead of the progressive accumulations of humanity. All this has become a standard. We can only answer the question asked before by taking a look at the reality behind what is seen from a class perspective. And this class perspective from which we want to take a look at reality has been made invisible largely, and I think the time has come to clean our windows and clear the hazy images. Let's go back into the history. Since the 1990s, many organizations that called themselves socialist, they had mostly abandoned the class-based approach and instead turned into a structure of alliances which tried to include different social movements. Despair was at an all-time high at the time, but the working class had been defeated and even its existence was put into question. There was an unimaginable numbers of identities and movements taking the place of the working class. You couldn't keep up. It was autonomism, intersectionality, New Worldism, post-Marxism. All this also meant that we ignored the central role of the working class in overthrowing capitalism. Let's just remember again, we socialists placed the working class and the class struggle at the very center of social transformation and of our efforts to build up socialism. We are saying that the working class is the only social class that possesses the strategic social power necessary to become a revolutionary force. So it's not a matter of belief, but rather a scientific conclusion. It's not about belief of this or that sort, but we're dealing here with a scientific conclusion based on a comprehensive analysis of the relations of production, of social relations, and of power. The determination and the statement that the working class is a potentially revolutionary class, this is not a metaphysical abstraction, but rather an extension of materialist principles. This fundamental conclusion is more and more obvious at a time when the class character of everything is becoming more and more obvious as well. Just let's take a look at the world from this perspective and try to give an answer to the question asked before. What has the world become in the last 20 years? We see living conditions getting worse, flexibilization and precarization of working lives, especially on the grounds of women's domestic and care burdens, the double burden. It's not enough to have a single job. You get lost in dozens of different jobs, you work yourself to death and still are not able to make a living with your jobs. The intensification of inter-imperialist rivalry and the struggle for distributing the world, not only to various regions, but in all areas. The trend in various countries to extend across the globe, wars the world over. All this is on the rise. Racism on the rise. Mass migration of people is on the rise. We see that people don't find a safe place to live in anymore. Migrants who are turned into targets of the anger in the countries that they move into, an anger that should be directed against capital instead of being directed at the migrants. This is what we see when we take stock today. The very fact that the increasing hostility towards women and LGBTIs has become legitimate and ordinary is something that we also need to draw your attention to. And even in countries which are furthest advanced, which are the cradle of democracy, in these countries we see practices which neglect the basic principle of democracy. Trump didn't recognize the results of the election. The Capitol Hill was stormed. PM Johnson sent the parliament home. Bolsonaro in Brazil didn't recognize the election results and called for a military coup and had to leave the country. In Tunisia, the parliament was dissolved, while in Bolivia and Peru, coups ousted newly elected presidents. We see also coups in Sudan, Mali, Upper Volta, Myanmar, and finally Niger, which led to the establishment of military governments. Almost all over the world, democratic rights and freedoms are further restricted and constrained under the pretext of fighting against migration or fighting against terrorism under the pretext of having to defend the country, of having to ensure a stable development of the economy. Under the pretext of fighting inflation, the bourgeois society in almost every country is resorting to tight monetary policy, and they cut back on public expenditures. Racism, chauvinism, and racism, as I said, are being fueled in all countries, and all this shows that the monopolies have a lot of problems in staying in power, not only in independent countries, but also in developed capitalist countries. The inevitable result of the continuation of attacks in all economic and political fields, the shrinking wages, the gradual deterioration of living and working conditions, all that has been leading to the rise of discontent, to struggle and organization tendencies amongst workers and employees. The main basis for this mobility is the dream of another life of the workers, who no longer want to bear the heavy consequences of inequality, injustice, exploitation, and violence created by capitalism. After a 30 years break in the UK, the strikes that started in 2022 in the railways industry spread to many other industries on the basis of demands for higher wages and reduced labor intensity. I'm talking about this dissatisfaction and willingness to engage in a struggle amongst workers the world over, and I can mention many more examples. For instance, France, September 22, we saw strikes by energy, education, and railway workers. There was a pension reform which had been put on the agenda in January 2023, and workers responded to that with demonstrations and marches. The country, France, was shaken by the biggest strikes and demonstrations since 1995, which also took on a political character. India, millions of workers participated in general strikes across the whole country in all sectors. At the beginning of 2022, the protests in Kazakhstan, which started with strikes by all workers, they extended within a very short time across the entire country, targeting the government backed by Nursultan Nazarbayev that had been in power in this country for 32 years. Mass demonstrations that developed into an uprising could only be brought under control through the declaration of a state of emergency. Sri Lanka, people gathered around the presidential palace chanting "Dictator Gota" as a response to the high costs for the daily goods of living. The government had to resign, and the president was forced to flee the country. Bolsonaro was defeated in the second round of elections in Brazil in autumn of 2022 by the rising movement of the working class and working people. He fled to the United States. Let's move on to South Africa. While the uprising of the Sudanese people continued, labor struggles in the Republic of South Africa have continued to develop over the last years. And then we have the examples of Bangladesh, Republic of South Africa, Greece, Pakistan, Mexico. They all show that the workers' attempts to organize themselves increase. Workers and working class in Turkey have carried out important campaigns in the last 3 years. In 2021, in many companies, workers organized strikes in order to raise wages, to put an end to the usurpation of rights of workers. They did this under Erdoğan's rule, under the terrible repression of this one-man regime, and despite the amendments to the trade union laws that imposed harsh conditions on the process of obtaining union authorization in workplaces, this still was a period in which the organized struggle became increasingly important for the working class. The labor movement, workers' movement sometimes assert limited political demands, but very often it develops spontaneously within the narrow field of spontaneous movements. The economic struggle cannot yet advance as a struggle that achieves permanent advanced gains, a struggle which repels the attacks of the monopolies and the domination mechanisms. Only a small minority of the working class is organized in trade unions, and these trade unions are controlled by the trade union bureaucracy, which collaborates with the bourgeois society and the monopolies. The very fact that the working class is not organized as an independent social force around its own party is the reason for the weaknesses of the working class. Wherever there are revolutionary class parties, it's a fundamental task to do away with these shortcomings and to fight with determination, make sure that the labor movement can advance on an independent political line. This is also essential for the development of the movement of the oppressed peoples and its progress towards a complete liberation. So the question of how the working class should do policies and politics is one of the most fundamental questions. We need to answer this question by remembering our roots. 1920, the 9th General Assembly of the Russian Communist Party, Lenin defined on this occasion politics as the most intense, generalized and sharpened expression of the economy. Politics refers to all kinds of tactical, strategic and ideological activities aimed at changing this order wherever class contradictions manifest themselves. At this point, I'd like to touch upon the Palestinian issue. The Israeli massacre in Gaza is increasing in intensity with each day passing. Not the states of the people, but the peoples of the world are becoming more and more vocal against the massacre in Gaza. Under conditions where in countries which are termed to be the cradles of democracy, where it's banned to pronounce the name Palestine or to carry the Palestinian flag. That's just banned and prohibited. In countries like Turkey, which hypocritically protests against Palestine on the axis of religious brotherhood, we see that while trade relations with Israel continue as much as possible, and we also see that steel and chemical materials for the bombs that are being thrown onto the people of Gaza continue to be shipped from Turkish ports through the companies of Erdoğan and his cronies. It's precisely here where we see how vital the power of influence and the difficult capacity of the working class is. Let me give you some examples. The transport unions in Belgium went on strike in the enterprise supplying the Israeli company Elbit, blocking the entrance. Workers demanded the cancellation of the agreement with the Israeli company, otherwise they would not produce for Israel anymore. In Barcelona, in Spain, dockers declared that they would prevent the operation of ships carrying war material. In Italy, dockers again also refused to load weapons destined for Israel. In the United States, labor leaders, representing thousands of workers in the defense industry, they called for a ceasefire. The West Coast Dockers Union is pledged not to touch Israeli cargo. This is what the working class is able to do, to disrupt the production and circulation of commodities, to resist the legitimate violence organized by the capitalist order through the state, and to resist it with its power position in production. Our power from production is a truth, and these are sentences which sound like platitudes in our ears. We need to turn them into truths again. The working class is completely excluded from all spheres of representation in the bourgeois order. The means of organization have been taken away from it. The historical social networks that it has built up as a class have been shattered. they are gone. Its capacity to influence politics has been severely reduced. Its international organization has been weakened. And in such a period, it's necessary for us to work patiently, faithfully, and with great labor and great effort in order to transform the changing power of the working class away from a static potential to turning into an active force. It's necessary for us to resist, to fight, to organize. It's necessary to mobilize the power of the proletariat, which comes and stems from its potential to intervene in the means of production, in the channels of distribution, in the seemingly natural flow of life, and to use them and turn them against the capital. To be able to overcome barbarism, we have to focus on what is essential. Those who are concerned with being in contact and in touch with the reality of the proletarian forces have to come to the fore. And this meeting face-to-face requires intimacy, closeness. It requires to leave geographies. We need to leave our comfort zones and dare to reach out to the deserts of reality. I'd like to remind you that this does not happen through being visible on social media. This can only happen on the ground through our work. In the age of social media, I do not underestimate the social impact created by these new means of communication. But it's also a big mistake to believe that virtual public opinion have an organizing power just on their own. Digital creativity can make things easier, but it cannot replace the nitty-gritty work required to organize. The hours of face-to-face contact with people cannot replace collaboration and trust in each other. Over the last 10 years, an atmosphere of resistance has developed as a result of large and small steps of resistance, sometimes connected with defeats, sometimes with victory. In the coming period, we will see a further tightening of class contradictions that will turn into a more concrete conflict. We're now at a moment where the political organizations of the working class, the class parties, the economic organizations have important tasks to fulfill. In this period of barbarism, our task as socialists and revolutionaries is to meet the political organizational needs of the labor movement. Every organization struggles for rights, even the loudest cry of the oppressed, to a common united root. That's what we have to do. Our task is to develop the means of struggle in order to lead the oppressed and laborers whose organizations have been cut short. We need to bring them into a position where they're able to break their chains. We must make the reality of socialism topical again. We must organize proletarian revolutionism as a real movement among the people. This will defeat international barbarism. Barbarism will be defeated, working class will win, the peoples will win. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sevda Karaca, for this heartwarming contribution to our conference.